previous video we explored the sum function, and we also looked at some of the different ways we can use the function using the formula builder in Excel. This video is going to be dedicated to looking at some other very common functions that we'll use within Excel. I'm going to move through a list of 6 functions and deal with them relatively quickly. So if you want to learn more about them or recap, just pause the video and spend a bit of time on each function. First of all, let's just do a quick recap on the sum function. Let's say here I have my total sales value, but it doesn't include the sales tax. So I may want to create a new column that includes the total of the product value plus the sales tax. A bit of a long-winded title, but never mind. So I'm going to start my function again by pressing the equals, open my bracket, and I'm going to add the first value by clicking on it. It automatically loads into the formula bar. I'm going to try first of all adding separate parameters by pressing the comma and then adding my second parameter. At this stage I just want to show you a handy feature within formula editing, and that is the ability to drag the tooltip around. Sometimes this tooltip will obscure the information that you're working with, so it's good to know that you can just grab it and move it to a different place. Also, as we'll see throughout the program, these formulas can become very complex, and sometimes it's useful to know which parameter you're working with. If I click on the parameter in question, it has a little hyperlink, and when I click on it, the first parameter is selected. If I click on the second parameter, the second parameter is selected. Okay, that is my 2-parameter version of this sum function, but probably the easiest way to do it would just be to select both cells at the same time. I close my bracket. Very important to close my bracket and tell Excel that I finished with the function. I hit enter and the calculation is performed. You will notice also that my function has been capitalized. Even though I typed it in lowercase, it will become a uppercase lettering to inform the user that you're dealing with a function. You'll notice as I just closed that function that I closed the brackets. It is worth noting that I don't have to close the bracket. If the formula is sufficiently straightforward, I can simply press the enter key and Excel will auto-complete and add the closing bracket. This is fine when you're using a straightforward function and it will become a bit of a shortcut. But it is a habit you should be careful of. As we look at different functions and more complex functions, it is very important to remember to close each bracket. Why would that be? Well, as we move through the program, we'll see functions within functions within functions. If you're not closing out your functions correctly, the syntax of your formula is going to go horribly wrong. So I've closed my sum function. Excel now knows that I've finished with it. I hit enter and my calculation is completed. Here we're going to move on to another bit of functionality within Excel. We've already looked at filling down a column, but we've looked at filling down a column with a static value or a value that might be in a series such as days of the week. But we can also use the fill down, using the fill down handle within Excel on my cell in question to fill down a formula. I can simply drag it to the bottom and that same formula is replicated for each row. You will also notice that the values are different. And that is because the formula is automatically varying as it needs to. My first function is looking at G6H6, but in the next row the sum function is looking at a different range appropriate to that row. This is what's called relative referencing. Now we will look at relative and non-relative referencing in much more detail in the next chapter. But this is just an introduction to using the fill handle to fill your formula down throughout a block of text. So that is a recap of the sum function. Let's have a look at some other functions that may be of interest. We have a list of numbers here. I can find out the total sum of this column by adding a sum function. I type the word sum, select my column, close the function and hit enter. But another shortcut to doing this is to simply press Alt and type equals. This function automatically tells Excel that you want to do a function of the column that is above it. It's one of the many clever things that Excel does, which sometimes is very helpful, sometimes can slightly get in the way. But this is a very useful shortcut. So remember, Alt equals. Another clever function of Excel is that it decides to replicate columns and fill them down. This one is not particularly useful to me in this situation, so I'm just going to delete those auto-completed values. I have the sum of this column, but I may also want to know just simply how many rows there are. So to find out how many rows, I'm going to need to count the rows. So this time I'm going to use the count function. I type equals and write count. As we can see, the autocomplete from Excel has detected the function and is ready to populate it. So I'll open my bracket to start adding values, and now I can simply add the range I want to be calculated. I close the brackets and hit enter. The number formatting has completed because it is in keeping with the column which is above it, but I can simply change that number formatting to be a number. So 9 is the total count of my rows. And again, I can double check it by selecting the range and looking at my status bar totals here. Another function which is very popular and very useful is the count A. Now, first of all, let's understand what count cannot do that count A can do. If I was to add a count function here and attempt to count these rows above me by just counting text values, closing the brackets, Excel would return a 0. Now Excel is returning a 0 because it cannot find any numerical values. My count was successful here because the numbers it was looking at were just that, numbers. But in this situation, it cannot count text. It's not able to interpret it. However, if I use the count A function, the count A function will simply count anything in a cell. That can be a number or text or a formula. It doesn't count number formatting or any other kind of cell formatting, but wherever there is information within a cell, and by that we mean information that would be visible from the formula bar, count A will count it. So we see that I am able to get a count of the rows that are in this list. Another function we may be interested in is the maximum. For example, I have a number of sales on a number of products. I may be interested to know what was the biggest sale of the month or the year, for example. To do that, I can use the maximum function. I type max, the shortcut of maximum, select my range, and close the function by closing the bracket. Excel will tell me the maximum number it has found in that range is 329. And visually we can inspect, we can see that 329 is in fact the maximum number. Similarly, we can also find the minimum. I type the shortcut min, open my bracket, feed it the range in question, and close the bracket again, hitting the enter key to come out of the cell. And another quick visual inspection will tell me that yes, 105 is the minimum value. It's also worth noting that by default Excel will load the following 3 status bar calculations for you, but you are actually able to add some more. So there are various different options that can be added, but I'm interested in these calculation options available here. I already have average, count and sum. I can add in the minimum or the maximum. So let's go ahead and add minimum. From now on, any range I select will display the average, the count, the minimum and the sum. And I'm able to confirm 105 matches my 105. Another useful bit of information I might want to gather about my data. What is the typical amount of money I'm getting per transaction? For that, I can use the average. As I type the word average, we can see that Excel is automatically populating and is trying to anticipate what formula I want to add. If I agree with the formula that is selected, i.e. the one that is highlighted here in blue, I can simply use the Tab key and Excel will auto-complete the formula. This can be quite useful as our formulas get longer and more complex. So I've now completed my formula and in fact even opened the first bracket. I can then select the data I'm interested in, close that bracket and hit enter. We now have the average value. Let's use our same check, select the data, find the average, 22389, matches my 22389. So these are some of the most commonly used functions within Excel. Sum, count, count A, max, min, and average is going to get you through most of your standard calculations. We will look at some slightly more advanced functions later on in the program, but this is a good start. Get yourself familiar with these functions, try loading the learning resources and practicing with these functions.